Hey, Sean, and welcome. So, in the games industry today, the environment for new game launches has become increasingly difficult. And we've seen a number of games that have launched to kind of underwhelming player expectations or even complete failure. And some of these games have lost over $200 million in total development and marketing costs. And so, for new game launches, we've seen so many failures relative to successes over the past few years. And I think there's a number of reasons for this, but I think one issue that does seem to be a major contributing factor is that games today do not seem to be properly vetted or have enough player feedback and validation. So now I want to transition to you, Sean, and what LiveAware is doing. Does LiveAware solve this problem?
Well, we certainly believe LiveWire is a great tool to add to a team's toolbox. It takes a lot to overcome some of the inertia that you talked about earlier, and we're seeing that across the industry, which is pretty unprecedented. But I'm a professional game developer. I've been making games for well over 2 decades, and we felt the pain firsthand. We, on the AAA scale, when we're working at companies like Activision and Eidos and Microsoft, we had a ton of resources, UXR teams, marketing, publishing. But even with all of those resources, we always felt siloed from real player experiences, real player expectations. And I think a lot of teams today are working kind of in that silo, in that echo chamber. And so, I think one of the reasons why we're seeing so many of these failures is around this gap in
Mhm.
and the gap between what we think an audience wants and what they are actually expecting the game to do or to do for them or deliver. A big gap between a team's vision for the experience that they want to make and what players are actually how they're actually experiencing that what they've made there. And so, bridging that gap is really what we're trying to help solve at LiveAware. So we're building tools and workflows so that teams of all shapes and sizes can really reduce the gulf between what we're building and what players are
Right.
expecting.
And Sean, if you were to characterize like what are some of the major problems or issues that a lot of game studios or designers face when it comes to getting that feedback and understanding, whether you're on the right track in terms of like the internal game vision and things like that. What do you think those problems are? And then what aspects of that does LiveAware solve? And maybe you could even talk a little bit about specifically how the service works as well.
Since launching LiveAware last year, we've talked to hundreds and hundreds of game teams across the industry, all shapes and sizes, and we've identified a number of pain points that I think many of us are going through as we build these games. One is, teams have over time come to rely heavily on quantitative data. That's like numerical data that can be measured or analyzed statistically, and that's really helpful for identifying that an issue is happening with the play. But to understand why those issues are happening and what to do about them, we really need to start to leverage qualitative data and that kind of descriptive, subjective information where players are expressing their opinions and experiences really come to the fold. Qualitative data is really hard to capture and organize, especially at scale. It's very cumbersome. It can be a very manual process. And analyzing that feedback can take hundreds of hours and specialized skills. And so one of the things LiveWare is trying to do is automate the entire process for capture, analysis, and sharing that evidence, so that even small teams can do this very fast. We're seeing this across the board. Especially this last 18 months, where teams are shrinking.
Mhm.
We're having to do more with less.
Right.
With the rise of hybrid and remote work, it's becoming increasingly challenging to collaborate, and to realize the creative vision. So, what we're finding is many teams just stop the process of ingesting feedback. They often work for many months, sometimes years, in that echo chamber, and it's really to their detriment, I think. So if we can make that experience of bridging the gap between game teams and players easier, that more teams we find are doing it, and they're building that habit of regular listening, which we think is so important.
Just for the audience so they kind of understand exactly how LiveAware works, could you kind of like, maybe more specifically describe what the service does, and then maybe try to bridge that gap because if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like what you're saying is that the thing that's not coming across in a lot of player feedback sessions when game studios are trying to do player validation is understanding the nuances with some of the qualitative feedback that they're getting. Maybe that's getting lost, and maybe there's more of a focus on quantitative. So if you could also just kind of highlight where LiveAware could potentially like highlight some of those things that of regular, using a regular player feedback system, whether it's whether it's a focus group or whether it's using some of these like cloud-based playtesting services, what that wouldn't do.
Totally. Yeah, LiveAware, we built it first and foremost to, I mentioned earlier that LiveAware, we want to automate the entire process of capture, analyze, and share. And so we started with a vision of being able to capture any play experience from any device anywhere in the world. So this is high quality streaming, recording from desktop, from mobile, console, XR. Um, uh, Very high end streaming, so it's highly optimized. Doesn't interfere with gameplay at all. One button click, and you can be privately streaming. Anybody can be privately streaming that experience to a private web portal where teams can view and analyze that material. We encourage the team and players to use a think aloud method, so they're verbally annotating, commenting as they play, and the system automatically transcribes, translates. In the case we support 35 languages, and we can also ingest things like Discord conversations, survey data, a lot of other that kind of data that can come in. And then as soon as videos hit the platform, the system automatically gets to work analyzing that material. So looks for things like bugs, areas of improvement, technical issues, and presents that information to a team in a really easy to use dashboard. And that's meant to surface insights for any member of the game team. So whether you're an artist or a designer or a programmer, based on the themes and the topics that you're interested in most, LiveAware is surfacing those details to you, and which you can drill down to see what exactly the player was or players were saying, and go right to moments in the play experience so you can understand what was happening through integrations with the tools that devs already use, like Jira and things like that. Teams can pass that information around, right to the people who can take that information and make good use of it and make fixes. And so it's really the first tool that's built for game developers by game developers to integrate into their process from a very earliest stages of development. So LiveAware, for instance, is really useful before you're even ready to go out to players. You can use it for internal build reviews, feature reviews, really helpful for ensuring that teams can be cohesive and work very closely together, especially if they're remote and hybrid. And then it grows with the team as they begin to start to work with friends and family, external players. The service is able to expand to take that in.
Right. And so, I mean, I think you've mentioned quite a lot. So maybe just to specifically break down a little bit more. But the first thing you said is that, it acts as a way of kind of recording a bunch of like player gameplay. And so on the one thing that it does is it will record and store players who are game testing a game. And then the second part that you mentioned is that it will analyze that gameplay and be able to create a dashboard and be able to provide some kind of analysis on that dashboard to potentially highlight some insights that normally would otherwise take a producer or a product manager or some kind of analyst to sit down, watch all that stuff, and try to figure that stuff out. So there's like a time saving component there. The other thing you mentioned is that it does some kind of, it sounds like sentiment analysis. So whether you're attaching some kind of LiveAware agent to Discord or Slack, or maybe it goes into certain forums and just analyzes a bunch of the text or videos and things like that to also try to draw insights, not just from playtests, but from maybe some communities or websites or things, YouTube videos or things of that nature, to try and kind of draw stuff in and also highlight specific insights that could be used to help a team with understanding where there may be some issues. Am I
That's absolutely correct. Yeah,
okay?
that's exactly right. Yeah. And that multi-channel feedback is really where it gets very powerful for teams because feedback is living in so many different places, right? It's the real player experience as they play. It's in the Discord conversations before, during, and after release of new builds, in reviews, in public forums like YouTube and Twitch videos, and those comments. And so we're really building LiveAware to be a multi-channel, be able to monitor that feedback across multiple channels, bring that all in together in one place so that teams can have a very easy way to find and analyze
Right.
that information.
And maybe something that hasn't been explicitly stated by you, but that's kind of coming across is that there's a lot of sort of automation, possibly AI. I assume you guys are doing a lot of this stuff using AI. And one of the thesis that I have is that I have a belief that in this age of AI, that the most critical factor for success will be essentially product velocity, meaning both the direction and the speed at which companies can make a good product. And so, to the extent that you have this kind of tool that helps you determine the direction to pivot when you're getting game feedback, and to be able to do all this stuff very quickly, I think, in theory, will really help game development teams make the right kinds of decisions and could be very valuable. But I wanted to have you maybe opine a little bit on that aspect in terms of AI and how much AI integration is in your service. How much do you guys leverage AI to do some of these things that you were talking about?
Yeah, it's a critical component of the product in that, you mentioned earlier, the big pain point in the kind of the old way of handling all of this stuff was somebody had to sit and watch this material. So an hour of gameplay could take 3 hours to sit through and hand document key areas of the play. They might have to manually make clips, and share that information through a variety of different communications tools. So AI can help radically improve or make more efficient that whole process. So our system can go through and analyze gameplay footage, can analyze the transcripts, can pull in these conversations and look for themes across that data. And so really, it's not only handling the manual kind of minutia of those basics, but it would be nearly impossible for an individual to look at the corpus of data at scale. So if you have
Right.
hundreds of hours of play, so for even medium-sized teams, large-sized teams, or that don't have a dedicated UXR group, this is just it's a game changer in terms of team's ability. And for us, one of the things that we really want to one of our big missions is to democratize this information so that as an individual on the team, as an artist or as a designer, they have access to this as part of their regular process of development. We think this is a massive enabler for individuals to be able to make good decisions about how to improve their part of the game.
Yeah, actually, that's something I hadn't thought about. But to the point that you guys are recording all these videos and you're able to create different kinds of visibility, right? Like whether it's dashboards or things like that. And it doesn't necessarily need to just be for a product manager, or producer, or game designer. But to your point, like there could be aspects that are tailored for different disciplines within the company. Like, somebody like, you might have hundreds of hours of gameplay and there are certain comments buried kind of needle in the haystack style somewhere about art style and things of that nature that should be going to an artist. And so that basically through the use of AI and things like that, you could basically call those specific comments out and then be able to make some of that stuff visible to people.
That's exactly right. Then that's the main mission is we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot of this information is siloed. It's in the hands of a UX research team and it's delivered to teams through reports. But what if an individual on the team could get a digested version from the last 2 weeks of play?
Yeah.
Here are the topics that I care about as an artist. So I want to know about the visual quality of the boss fights or the lighting conditions or things like that. That individual can express what they're interested in and have that information served to them, so they're constantly being have a stream of feedback coming in from the various
Right.
places so they can make better decisions. That's a real enabler.
Yeah, I was actually just coincidentally just yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who's maybe I shouldn't specifically call him out, but he's a very famous person who was essentially the creator of one of the biggest shooter games in the industry, and one of the things that he told me was that he felt that for a lot of games, when you think about when certain games fail, there's like this oversimplification in terms of like ascribing a causality. Oh, this game failed because of this or that reason on and generally in like some kind of strategic context. But what he was saying is, but sometimes it's actually not that. It's actually that you have hundreds of these small decisions, these micro decisions that are being made, and that sometimes the reason why some of these games fail is because of some of these micro decisions that the management teams, leads of some of these game studios aren't actually aware of, but it's somebody like deep down that's responsible for a small thing. And so I guess in theory, if your service could help surface some of these micro issues, because what
Yep.
he's saying is like it's not the macro, it's the micro, right? It's
Right.
essentially that's what he was saying. I mean,
Millions of tiny decisions
right,
along the
right,
way.
right. That would actually give a lot of development studios potentially a lot of visibility and a lot of power to be able to affect change in their game.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah, and I think the sooner that that a team is conditioned or builds the habit of really being thoughtful about listening
mhm,
and being open to that feedback and using feedback as part of their normal mechanisms for improvement, that can pay dividends in the long run. So those micro decisions are being made earlier. There's earlier course correction. You don't get to what traditionally happens with games is to the end of a kind of the cycle. We're going into release, and now we're going to start to check this against player expectations when it's way too late to make major course corrections. So I'm a firm believer in that, and also a firm believer in can we empower individuals on the team to have the visibility into these problems so that they can make improvements more rapidly. And not only do you have a happier team that's more engaged because they're seeing the results of their work, but they're more inclined to lean forward and to make those improvements on their own. So we've seen a massive with teams using LiveAware a massive acceleration. Smaller teams are iterating faster as a result.
right. And for maybe somebody in the audience who's potentially from a game studio who's thinking about, oh, actually, we do need a better solution when it comes to player validation and feedback. Could you like characterize for us a bit? How would you characterize like um, let's say a typical team that's trying to get player feedback and validation relative to then a team that's using LiveAware? How would you compare those? Maybe from a staffing or economic perspective, could you characterize that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we find most teams have the desire
Mhm.
to incorporate, basically build their community early and be inclusive and sort of wanting to get their feedback as early as possible. But oftentimes they end up deferring that for many months because it's hard to do, and you get kind of embedded in the normal cycle of development. And so they do it irregularly. When they do those feedback sessions, they tend to use things like post-play surveys or Discord queries, and the information that comes back can be very thin. Players often are very poor at self-reporting things. They have a port, they don't remember the gameplay session. They can't give a lot of details, and then teams don't have the evidence to correlate to that feedback. So what we're seeing is many teams deferring that process until very late. They are that information is being siloed through a product manager, through a community manager, through a producer. So it's not getting down into the teams fast enough. And so with LiveWare, we're obviously it's a tool that devs can use very early on, and as I mentioned, the entire team can benefit. So a team like BrainJar, they're working on a really novel game called Dead as Disco,
Mhm.
which you may have heard of. They have incorporated small team. I think they're like 12 folks have incorporated LiveWare as part of their early process. They went from really having a hard time with even their internal build reviews, getting team members to capture and to share feedback, to where now weekly every member of the team is playing at least an hour. Those team members are verbally annotating as they play, and so they're getting tremendous data from the team itself on things that they're seeing and how they can improve. And then the team was conditioned to use that workflow, and so when they started to go out to friends and family, and then eventually to more full scale external players, the team was really already adapted to leveraging the tool to get what they needed out of it. And so,
Right. And I get the kind of value proposition around, especially for a small team, you don't have a lot of people, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a huge budget. So then, at some point, you probably do want to get player validation and feedback. And so by using LiveAware, it's going to be a lower cost, lower effort, lower amount of people. Like if you were at EA or Zynga, could you characterize what would that consumer insights team look like in terms of people, staffing, time? And then, we don't need to go into that. Or maybe you
no,
could
no,
just
it's a
speak to,
great question.
and and
It's huge.
and then maybe you could talk to your customers, the customers you have now that are using LiveAware. What does that team look like? Is it one person? Is it five people? If you could help characterize that, that'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. Well, so in a AAA setting, in the sort of large publisher scale or AAA dev teams, they often have a dedicated UX research team.
Mhm.
So they have UX researchers on staff that are there to take builds, get them into play community, do all the player logistics and stuff like that, and then come back with reports. The problem is that's often a shared resource, so teams are vying for a time slice of those research teams' time. And often there are long cycles to be able to get a build and then come back with a report. So we find that many teams feel like that intermediation can be cumbersome. It's good in that it's formalized and it's very professionally done, but they want a more rapid way to do that kind of on their own. And so we have a range of customers from Crafton at the high end scale to a number of large venture-backed AA and AAA teams, folks like Bonfire, Believer, Gardens, GSC Game World's another customer that just released Stalker 2. What we're finding that's very interesting is they're using LiveAware for very different use cases, which is great. LiveAware ends up being a very flexible tool for a lot of different things. In the case of GSC Game World, for instance, they were using for two great use cases. One, quality assurance. So they were rapidly releasing new fixes into the community, and their community was using LiveAware to send back captures of the play, and they were able to identify and spot bugs within their community in a very fast way. So as soon as players, the system itself was picking up on these, and they would be able to go into LiveAware and see a corpus of clips and highlights that would show them exactly what was going on. They also started using it for analysis of public streamer commentary. So when they would release a new patch, you can identify videos in YouTube, for instance, like Co-Carnage did a whole series on Stalker 2 play, and instantly see from across the 16 hours that Co played problems that he was having, insights from his kind of expert play perspective. That was two really those great use cases. Other teams like Treehouse have been using it for competitive analysis. So they have been playing competitor games and watching streams of competitor games, ingesting that information into LiveAware to be able to see, okay, what are players saying about comps for the game that they're building, and they found that very helpful to be able to kind of have a very clear picture of what kind of market they were going into and make adjustments to their play to differentiate. So those are just a couple of examples of how teams are leveraging it. But in all cases, what I think teams are finding the value in is that they have control. It's a tool that they can use. They don't have to wait. They don't have to schedule time for that information. They have it at their fingertips, which is really critical no matter what scale a team you are.
Right. Now, one of the issues that I've personally found when trying to get player feedback is like this issue around signal versus noise. I'm wondering if you could comment on that, right? Because like, yeah, I think it's very difficult sometimes to understand what is good feedback, what is not good feedback. I mean, and to some degree, maybe that's not on LiveAware, right? Like your service does something, and it might be more. the game studio tastemakers or designers that need to interpret it. But is there something in terms of, potentially being able to highlight specific types of feedback that may be more relevant or important relative to other types of feedback that may be less so?
It's a super great point, and in fact, we often call it the feedback tsunami. And teams kind of get inundated with feedback from all different directions, and it's hard really to differentiate what to pay attention to, what not to pay attention to. So I think it's both an art and a science. We often recommend some things to teams, especially ones that are less experienced in kind of being on the front lines of this kinds of feedback. One of them is to ensure that you're setting clear objectives when you set out to capture and analyze feedback. Teams at any given point really make sure that you're focused on specific questions that you're trying to answer or specific things that you're trying to test, and have those in mind when you're reviewing the feedback. So you're really filtering for those specific things as opposed to coming in completely general. Um, Teams ought to look for patterns rather than specific outliers. So individual complaints from specific like vocal minority can really skew your decision making if you pay too much attention. So you're really looking for themes across many different players,
Mhm.
many different contexts across time, and be judicious about how you react to those things is really important. We find that prioritizing super engaged players, so players who have leaned in, who clearly have a vested interest in your success, who understand the genre of the game you're building, those kinds of players can often provide more valuable feedback because it's more in depth. And then you can balance that with newer players who have a fresh perspective on it, and taking into account those things can be very valuable. And then, of course, I talked earlier about qualitative and quantitative, but when you can combine those two kinds of data together, it really can form a very powerful net in terms of how to deal with that stuff. So those are some of the kind of examples of things that we recommend.
Right. Yeah, I think that the tricky part about player feedback and validation is that it's very much an art, right? It's very difficult to try to parse through and understand how to react to player feedback at times. But I thought I could ask you a question where I kind of step back and, kind of like not specifically related to LiveAware, but more of a philosophical question about player feedback and validation. Since you're in this space, and I assume you've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but kind of like the way that I've characterized player feedback and validation is at the simplest level, I kind of think about two primary schools of thought. And I call it top of pyramid and bottom of pyramid, right? So if you imagine a pyramid, at the bottom layer is kind of like what I would call like the riot philosophy, like player first, being driven by what the players say, and really like leaning towards the players to tell you how you should make changes and to optimize gameplay for them. Now, part of that is also conditioned upon understanding what the player persona is and finding the right kinds of players. But the philosophy there is players drive the feedback, drive the design and decision making. Now, top of the pyramid is more, I kind of characterize it, and I don't know if they would agree with me or not, but old school Blizzard, where in old school Blizzard was like, we are the gods.
The auteur model.
We are the tastemakers. We
Yep.
know what players want. If
Yes.
I like it, they will like it, right? And it's actually kind of similar to, I don't know if you've read Rick Rubin, The Creative Act,
Absolutely.
but yeah,
Yes.
Rick Rubin's like, you need to make something that you
For you.
love.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Exactly.
there's these two schools of thought.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, like, where do you fall on that? Like, based upon LiveAware, I would assume you're more oriented towards the bottom of the pyramid, but just again,
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
specific to your service, but just more of a philosophical question about player feedback and validation.
It's a
I'd love to
great.
hear your thoughts.
It's a great observation, and that continuum from auteur to completely audience led. It's a really fascinating through line, and the more teams we talk to, we realize that everyone's got a little bit of a different philosophy on this, as you said, the older school and the newer school. Um, I personally, as a developer, I think it's very important that a team have a very strong creative vision for what it is they're trying to build, the experience that they want players to have, a very clear idea of how mechanically and from a presentation perspective you're going to deliver that. But then within that vision, the being humble enough to understand that you're not going to get it right, the first time all the time,
Mhm.
and that it really takes. There's a lot of benefit to building an audience early and making them feel included in the process and having avenues for them to be able to help guide you and your team to refine within that vision.
Right.
Um, Personally, I've found, I've built games on both ends of the spectrum as the auteur, shut everybody else out in the world, and hope for the best. It's a very risky proposition, especially if you have a finite amount of time and budget, and you're forced to release. If you have endless budget and time, go for it. Um, those are great for very highly personal projects, and where I would say the artist kind of the purity of that vision it can come through. Today's market, though, I think audiences are diversifying tremendously, and it's harder, especially for us as we represent kind of a specific demographic, or if we're our age and our cultural background. To I think it's imperative to kind of condition a team to be able to listen and do that throughout the
Yeah.
life cycle of the product. So
And maybe, I'm just kind of thinking about this. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about maybe to some degree that this kind of the two models that I talked about may not necessarily be mutually exclusive. That they could potentially be complementary in the sense that like the creative act could potentially help characterize and define a new kind of gameplay model, but then the optimization of that would be bottom of the pyramid. So a specific example would be Dota mod for Warcraft 3 that gave us MOBAs
yep,
is the creative act.
yep,
But then the Dota mod to League of Legends is
yes,
the is the bottom of the
the bottom of
pyramid.
the pyramid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so yeah, maybe they are kind of compatible to some degree.
yep,
And I think there's also like maybe even like a middle layers because one of the friends that I speak to, formerly from Riot, has also suggested that the other thing that he's careful to do is not just take because I think Riot's big on player personas. You find your player persona and then you get feedback from them. But
yep,
then I think his philosophy is also not just the player persona, but like very specific people going for higher quality rather than quantity. So like
yep,
finding the like two, three, four, five people that are, really understand the specific vision of the game and what you're trying to achieve and have a lot of context and are tastemakers and the
yep,
getting the feedback from the tastemakers relative to a broader set of people. But
yep.
I guess in either of those cases, your tool would work the same, right?
Yeah, it's funny because when we set out to make LiveAware, it was really we very consciously said, "Hey, we're going to make a tool set that would cater no matter where you are on the spectrum, right?" And the other thing that we're really careful about is LiveAware doesn't prescribe what you should do with this information. It just tries to surface the insights to you in a way that's convenient and highly customizable, so you can filter for what you want to use it for. But we try not to exert an influence on the process itself for teams because we recognize that teams are approach this with very different philosophies in mind.
Right. And sorry, I wanted to go back
Yeah,
because I don't think I closed the loop on this question around, for example, if a team that might be interested in LiveAware is interested in using your tool,
yeah,
could you talk about for some of your current customers, like how many people does it take to run playtests using LiveAware? And then what is your, like your pricing model? How much would it cost a small studio to be able to use LiveAware? Just for some people who might be interested in the
yeah.
service.
Yeah, so one of the things we tried to set out to do when we designed LiveWare to make it a zero integration platform, so very easy to get up to speed and start using the platform. No engineering or technology required to be able to administer playtests. It's very low friction. So um, when working with external players, we have a playtest management system that handles scheduling. It's got a built-in CRM to handle contact details, send out information when a playtest starts with links so that players can get in and play. And so a very small number of people, oftentimes a producer or community manager, can run a large scale playtest using LiveAware. So I think that's very helpful. We've actually also done an integration with a tool called First Look, which is now owned by Pragma.
Pragma, yeah.
Yeah, Eden
Eden.
Chen.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So Pragma, it's like two great tastes that taste great together. First Look and LiveAware work really well together. First Look handles things like Steam code distribution, legal document signing, and things like that. Player attribution, and so teams are combining that sort of supercharged onboarding through First Look.
Yep.
We did an integration so the data comes through clean, and players use LiveAware to do the capture portion. So that's working really well. In terms of the pricing model, we have a flexible set of plans that run anywhere from a newly introduced pay-as-you-go plan that's meant for indie developers. We're looking to democratize LiveAware so that more and more teams can use it. And so it's a pay-as-you-go usage with very small fees for video ingest and video storage. It's unlimited seats, so we want to make sure everybody in your team can use it. Everyone within your community can use it, and not have to worry about nickel and dime on seats. The plans go up into, we have a basic tier that runs, it's like $399 a month. Pro tiers at $799 a month, and then up into enterprise tiers, which open up new features and additional capacity for teams to use. So no matter what kind of team you are and what kind of stage you're at, we're looking to be able to support you with the right price.
And so maybe the next question I can ask is, so you've launched this service, you've got some customers using it, and you had talked about some specific case studies with some of your customers, and I actually recognize most of your your customers, so I should probably ask them about it later. But like, I guess since launching, could you talk about maybe some of the lessons learned working with your customers, getting player feedback with the service? Maybe you could walk us through like some additional specific case studies, or but more focused on like, was there something interesting that came out of working with these customers and using LiveAware that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the best parts of the job, I would say, is getting to work with so many great teams and being a small part in their success. I think for me, as a longtime game dev, at this stage in my career, being able to inspire the new generation of game developers build great games is a real compelling mission for all of us here. And so, working with teams like BrainJar and Treehouse and Gardens and Bonfire have been really fantastic. The level of innovation that's happening within the industry, even at a very hard time, is just inspiring to see every day. And so, a lot of great lessons. One was we set out to make sure that LiveAware was something that we were using to improve our own service. And so we take great pride in the level of support and connectivity we have with the teams that are on the platform, and constantly listening, constantly taking in feedback from them on how to improve the system. And so LiveAware itself is kind of a case study for building that habit of regular feedback. So we're kind of we're eating our own dog food, as it were. Recently we released 3 case studies: BrainJar, Treehouse, and Lunchbox Entertainment, that are up on the website now. BrainJar is one of our favorites. Dead as Disco is a really fantastic kinetic. It's a music video meets fighter, where the action is highly synchronized to any music that you feed to it. And so in a game like that, where reaction time and animation is so important, you can imagine all of the ways in which that system can break and not be responsive in a way that's natural for players. And so they've been really successful at using LiveAware to spot issues, small deficiencies in the presentation or the feel, the mechanics, in a very fast way, and then to have, as I mentioned earlier, have the evidence that they can support to give to an engineer, so that you don't run into things like cannot reproduce, will not fix, need more information. An engineer or a dev has exactly what they need to make those problems go away. And so the iteration loops have gotten faster and faster. James, the producer there, talks a lot about, prior to using LiveAware, he just couldn't get the team into the habit of regular build reviews. The idea of putting it out to players was very foreign to them. They had a lot of resistance from the team. They're like, hey, it's not ready yet. And with LiveAware, not only did they build that habit internally, but it gave them the confidence to be able to go out to players and to know that that feedback was going to be useful. It wasn't going to be a waste of time, which is a huge game changer for them. For a team like Lunchbox, they're working on a MOBA. It's called Sirocco, and they had a very difficult to understand problem with their progression. That their prior surveys really wasn't, the players weren't articulating what problems they were having with the progression in the surveys in a way that the team could pick up. And when they started using LiveAware and getting that commentary in real time, they were able to pinpoint exactly what was happening. And then they ended up redesigning their progression as a result and really changing the trajectory of the game. So we feel that's one of our kind of our proud achievements is we were able to provide a vehicle for them to be able to get at those kinds of insights at a time when they could make those changes. So just a couple of examples there.
Right. And maybe one last question that's more specifically focused on the service itself and usage of the service would be a question really around when you think about the development lifecycle. I think certainly it's kind of a bit more obvious to me how you would use LiveAware when you're kind of like in alpha stage. But if you were to think about the other stages of development, earlier on when you're from the concept stage to when you're just starting to stand up certain features to the point where you're feature complete, and then just trying to kind of fine tune or iterate, like would you say that where would you recommend your customers to start using LiveAware, and does it have relevance in maybe some of the earlier stages of game development as well?
Great question. For us, we wanted to make sure that LiveWare was useful at all stages,
Okay.
and we recommend and have found our teams are getting the best value when they start at the conceptual phase. So way before they're ready to go out to players, that the teams themselves are building that habit of weekly reviews, feature reviews. So if an engineer or an artist is delivering a new on their deliverable, they'll record that and send it into LiveWare along with verbal annotations for that. The weekly build reviews with their team, especially with the distributed or hybrid teams where you have people all over the world, reviewing regularly, having those individual team members feel like they have a voice in the improvement. That's been a real game changer. Partner feedback when you're delivering early milestones to your publisher or your investor, having them jump into LiveWare, be able to provide that feedback so that everything's in one place. That's been really powerful. And as I mentioned, when teams kind of get accustomed to using LiveWare at that early stage, as they grow and they widen that funnel of folks that are kind of viewing and giving feedback, it's just a really natural evolution. Through concept, pre-production, production, we find teams are using it for those build reviews uh, and feedback. Quality assurance is another big use case. So QA teams are able to punch way above their weight. Smaller QA teams, instead of having to stop play, write down the bug, go back, try to reproduce it, make the clip. Those QA teams are just using LiveAware. They have a hotkey to save clips. They verbally annotate instead of writing down, and they can instantly send those things into Jira. So what we're finding is that teams that are having to either use their team as QA or smaller QA teams are able to be way more efficient. And then as you start to go to friends and family, as you start to go into these larger contexts, LiveAware scales. So as I mentioned, the player logistics workflows to be able to schedule those things. The desktop recorder is a very lightweight, easy to download, easy to run application that the players use. It runs in the background and is able to collect that information. And then as you get to launch and post-launch, the addition of being able to pull in data from Discord, pull in data from YouTube, and monitor live sentiment is really helpful. So we built LiveAware to be a kind of an end-to-end solution from the early stages all the way through to post-launch.
Right. And you kind of rushed through like the part where you talked about Jira, but I do think that's kind of a small thing, but kind of also very relevant and kind of important in the sense that to the extent that you have the AI that looks at the gameplay that can, potentially find specific issues. And then you have like this dashboard where you see all these issues and the Jira tickets are ready to go. And maybe a human producer or PM can just look at these and say, yes, 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 yes. Like how much time do you save, right? It's there is potentially a lot of cost savings there where LiveAware with AI then can directly integrate into a workflow. So I think that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, and we're really at the start of that now. So we built the initial integration to be able to channel evidence and channel commentary into Jira and other project management tools. But as you mentioned, where we're going with this is the system to be able to, as you mentioned, write the Jira ticket itself, document the reproduction steps, basically get it packaged up in a way where it's one button click and it's in, and
Right.
they have what they need. Today, our Jira integration is one direction, so you send information to Jira. We're working on a bi-directional communication so that the LiveWare knows what's in your Jira database, and so when a new issue comes up, it can add to an existing ticket, or it can tell you, "Hey, this is something that was resolved in a previous milestone, and now it's back."
Yeah. Or you can,
Alert you that
yeah.
you.
I mean, I think an ideal scenario too would be like, hey, here's a new build. Did these Jira tickets actually get resolved or not?
That's absolutely true. Right, you're essentially failing, yeah, failing a check.
Yeah.
So really, it's early days already. We're seeing a lot of teams get benefit from it, but you're absolutely right in your vision how it can evolve with the use of AI.
Yeah. And yeah, no, the one other interesting thing that you mentioned that you kind of rushed through, sorry, was like that the case study. And yeah, not I mean, I'm just saying for me, I heard it, but then as I think about it, I'm like, oh, actually, that's pretty cool. Was like when you mentioned how I forget the specific company was kind of externalizing their QA, right? By using Liveware, you basically have like a capability QA that's typically locked within a game studio. But then what you're saying is with LiveAware now you kind of have like this extranet of dedicated players or people in the community who you can then lock in and become like an externalized QA for your company. So I thought conceptually that was pretty cool. But yeah, I just yeah, you said it, but but my mind didn't click on it until just now.
And
But
what's nice in LiveAware is it'll pick up on those signals from many different sources.
yeah,
So and it organizes them in the same place. So you can say, hey, over the last 2 weeks, essentially show me all of the bugs related to this particular mechanic or boss fight, for instance, and it will pull the insights from your QA team. It will pull insights that came from like an external play test. It'll pull
right.
insights from your publisher and bring them together, organize them into one place so you can see them all in one easy to see view. So that kind of aggregation is really powerful when it casts a much wider net than typically for teams. This information is siloed depending on the department or where it's coming from.
Great. So now I just wanted to shift gears and maybe end with a little bit more background on you and the company. So the first question I have is like, I know you come studio side and you've had a long career, long time game industry veteran, worked on games like Tomb Raider to Never Alone. And so I just wanted to kind of like maybe step back a bit in your career from the point where you were on the studio side to thinking about this current opportunity, developing LiveAware. Could you talk about what was that origin story like? How did you make the transition from being on the studio side to kind of making this kind of a tool?
Yeah, I think there's three kind of key moments in my career that kind of set us up for LiveWare. And the first, I'll start in the sort of when I was working in AAA. I was running Crystal Dynamics for a number of years on the Tomb Raider series. My partner and CTO David Berger was the partner engineering director for 343. So he worked on Halo 4, 5, and Infinite. And we had both had very similar experiences coming from AAA, where we're on a development team. We have tons of resources. We have UXR, a research team at our disposal, marketing and publishing. And yet we still felt like as teams, we were cut off from contact and cut off from that direct kind of feel of how players were experiencing our work. We also had this problem where a lot of times at that time we were just really not only discouraged but prohibited from sharing early versions of our work with players, and so you're kind of flying blind at that point,
Mm,
especially after developing a game for 2-3 years, hoping that the thing that you're making is gonna resonate. So we felt that to be pretty problematic. When I got up to Seattle about 11 years ago, 10 years ago, I was asked to work on this very special project called Never Alone, which is an indie cooperative platforming game. And it was special in that, unlike the games that I worked on in the past, where we were, big budget, we were the experts. This was a game that was designed to be a celebration of a specific culture, an Alaska Native culture called the Inupik, and the project was designed to put them at the center of the development effort. So they were collaborators from the very beginning, and our jobs as game developers was really to extend our craft in a way that could help them share their cultural mythology and spiritual and also worldview with the worldwide gaming audience. So I learned that was the first time where we learned about the importance of like checking your ego at the door, really developing good listening skills, and working to cultivate a community very early on in development. So I think the inception of LiveAware started there in earnest. We were really successful in integrating a community and helping us to build a game that would be memorable for years to come. Um, where the turning point happened, I have a small game studio in Seattle called Very Very Spaceship, and we worked for years with Niantic on geospatial games. We had this problem where our teams could not did not have a feel for what players were experiencing when they were running around in the neighborhoods playing games like Pokemon Go. So we developed a really novel streaming backpack that would beam back the device display of the phone, the camera feeds, and their commentary, so that we could build geospatial games faster. And that was really the genesis of LiveAware. We shared that with teams in the Seattle dev scene, and we really got a lot of encouragement to generalize it for all games and to productize it. And that's when we spun LiveAware out. That was about 2 years ago.
Maybe the one other question I could ask is, since you started LiveAware 2 years ago, and more from a company perspective, could you talk about maybe some of the biggest challenges you've had over the last 2 years, and then maybe some of the biggest lessons learned?
I would say challenges in general started maybe 5 years ago with COVID. And when I look back
Yeah.
at kind of COVID was the sort of before COVID and after COVID. But COVID started a range of, I think, cultural events that have been very difficult for not only just everybody, but game developers in general tend to be pretty thoughtful and empathetic folks. But we had COVID and George Floyd and January 6th and Ukrainian invasion, and all of those events really made it more and more challenging, I think, to develop games. We've had now market changes recently with pullback in funding and downsizing and stuff like that. And so it's really one of the things that I've noticed is as we go to GDC and DICE this year is kind of like the last kind of big market downturn in games. We're kind of seeing who are the players in the industry that are really here for the right reasons, and you're
Right.
looking around the table and it's like, these are folks who have dedicated their entire lives to making great games and making great experiences. And so for us, that's been heartening to see those who are still in the game, those who are working hard against this stuff, and helping each other out through this time has been really important. So for us, looking at a lot of game developers, they're having to do a lot more with less. They're having to Smaller teams are having to punch way above their weight. And so the discovery is really, how can we outfit teams with tools and tech? How can we leverage things like AI to allow these creators to make amazing experiences, but do it at a scale that's more in line with what sort of the funding apparatus and the publishing apparatus is allowing us to do. And that's where we really felt like this is our time to be able to contribute in a way that could help the industry through this. And we think that this idea of feedback management, connecting with players, arming teams with information that they can make better decisions is really a really worthwhile type of mission.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a very important function within a game studio. So in theory, it seems like it should resonate with most game studios. But from the folks that you reach out to, what would be the biggest pushback? Why would a studio not use LiveAware?
That's great. There are a lot of always have lots of I guess no matter who we pitch to, I think we find that folks are engaged, and everyone's having this problem, no matter you're at AAA all the way down to indie. Same exact pain points. Um, I think right now um, many teams are running kind of um, there's uncertainty in the market. There's uncertainty with the amount of capital they have. Folks who raised in like 2020, 21 are getting to the kind of to the end of that funding, and new funding is hard to come by. So teams are having to rush into launches and things like that. So spending additional money is tough for a lot of teams. Um, a lot of times, introducing a new team on a development with a development group can be challenging. There's a lot of philosophy and inertia on established workflows that need to be overcome. So that can take time. And devs are busy. They have looming
Sure.
milestones.
Yep.
You know, there's always
Yeah.
something around the corner that can take higher priority on something like
Yeah.
this. So
Yeah.
our job is to make it as easy as possible to be like, try this thing. What we
Right.
find is when people actually give it a shot, we have a 1 month free trial.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, man, this is saving me so much time. How can I get in? So that's really been our goal.
Okay. All right. And so I think you alluded to some of the things when we talked about the Jira tickets that might be coming up, but are there any major upcoming milestones in terms of capabilities or features? And how are you thinking about the future of LiveAware just like further down the line?
Further down the field. Well, the thing I'm most excited about is one of the things I'm most excited about is our new pay-as-you-go plan. So it's completely self-service. A team can come in to the website, sign up, get a workspace, get going, absolutely free, and then only pay as much as they use. So for us, this is really significant because we see a lot of smaller scale teams now who could really use a product like this and just need a method to do that that's affordable to them. So for us, that's a really huge milestone. On the feature side, we're really very passionate about this idea of multi-channel ingestion of feedback. So we're building in new channels, new wherever feedback lurks. We're finding a way to get it into the platform and get it so that it can be counted as part of the information that's available for devs. So we started with a dev Discord ingest pass, so there's a bot you can apply to your Discord, set the channels and set the time frame, and it'll send that information over. We just have a path now to be able to analyze YouTube videos, and we're looking to continue to multiply that so that no matter you have survey data, you've got Steam reviews, and wherever your feedback lives, you can get it in. And I think that's going to be a real game changer. Um, the Insights dashboard itself is so powerful, but it's continuing to refine that in a way that makes it so that individual team members' highly personalized data comes to you and does in a very digestible way. So that's a big innovation happening on the dashboard side. Um, where this is going, I believe LiveAware is going to be an indispensable tool for all dev teams. That is something that people just come to expect. It works seamlessly with all of your dev tools, so you don't have to contort yourself or change your telemetry system or change any of your product management tools. We just integrate and fit in, and it's something that people come to rely on. So that in the future, we can't imagine a world where we're operating without that visibility into how real people are experiencing your game. And so I think we're on a great path toward achieving that.
All right. Well, Sean, that was the last question that I had. So maybe just to wrap, do you have any final message for the audience or any words of advice or anything else you'd like to end on? Maybe something I missed.
I mean, one message I would have, we talk to a lot of teams, and it is a very challenging time in the industry. But what it's great to see is so much innovation happening still. So many people dedicated to the craft of games, and I see so much happening with cross team and cross company support, and that is really powerful to see in an industry like ours. The real passion for this come out, and so if it's anything, it's words of positivity and hope that like we're going to come out stronger on the back end of this, and you can already see it with some of the great products that are hitting now. If you're interested in checking out LiveAware, come to liveaware.io. Hit us up we'll give you a quick demo, talk through your workflows. You can sign up for a free workspace and get started right away. And happy developing.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and insights, and good luck with LiveAware, Sean.
Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Bye.
Take care.